It's about time we get going. I'm Jeff Johnson from Explorations Early Learning, working with Inspired EC to put these sessions together. Last week we talked with Mike Huber about consent and rough and tumble play, and there was a lot of good feedback from this session. This time we have my early learning buddy, Heather Bernt-Santy, with us. I have known her for a number of years now. I met her when she started, I noticed her saying cool stuff on the interwebs and started paying attention to her and have looked for opportunities to engage and work with her since then. One of the neat things she said was that we as early learning professionals need to start seeing beyond the cute. We get really good at seeing the cute and the things that kids do, but there's a lot going on behind that. And when I heard those words come out of Heather's mouth, I knew this was somebody I wanted to learn from and engage with more. Heather's been working in early learning for 30 years or so. She just finished her master's degree. She works for a program at Purdue University. I'm sure you'll know a lot more about her by the time the session ends. While the session is going on, I'm going to pop links to that Early Childhood Nerd podcast, because that Early Childhood Nerd is Heather's podcast persona. If you have a question, unmute yourself. Otherwise, if you can keep yourselves muted just so we cut down on the background noise and things. At the end of the session, I'll pop a link into the chat for those of you who want a certificate for the session. The link goes to a short session evaluation, and once you submit that, a certificate will be generated and emailed to you. So Heather, are you there?
I am. I'm right here.
There you are. Well, why don't we jump in? Tell us, just kind of give us an overview of the topic, and then we'll go from there. How about?
Sure. Yeah. So the title, of course, is discussing behavior with families. Of course, behavior of the children that we're working with. But I think it's a little bit of a different approach than maybe other workshops take, or maybe a new way of thinking, because I'm basically going to say, let's don't do it as much.
Can I throw something in?
Absolutely.
Heather, my experience is a lot of programs treat that end of the day conversations with parents, it's kind of like tattling on the toddlers, or
Yes.
filing a police report about the preschoolers. Just kind
Yes.
of going through this list of everything that went wrong during the day, and it just doesn't seem right. I'm hoping you've kind of got a better alternative.
Yeah. So actually, Dan Hodgins and I did an episode of the That Early Childhood Nerd podcast a few months ago that was called "Quit Tattling on Children." That's kind of where all this started. I've always felt sort of uncomfortable about those kinds of conversations, both as a parent on the receiving end and as a child care provider, and then as a center director and trainer. Because what I was seeing was a huge power imbalance between I'm going to say tattler because I think it's funny, but I don't want to offend anybody. The teacher sharing the information and the parent who was receiving the information. I asked just in the last couple of days, as I've been thinking about how I wanted to approach this tonight, I asked both friends who are childcare providers and also friends who are parents who have used childcare or preschool or even in elementary school experiences to talk to me about it. And I asked the providers why they felt like, or if they felt like they needed to have these conversations, and if so, why. I asked my parent friends how they felt and what their experiences were with it. And it sort of has cemented what I already believed. It hit all my biases. But I do think there is a better way. So when I say I'm gonna talk about not doing it anymore, I want you to know that absolutely there are times when we do have to have those kinds of conversations. But we have to, I think, as a field, use a lot more discretion and critical thinking about those conversations than is the norm, I think. And towards the end, I will definitely talk about some of those reasons that we might really want to have the conversation, or and then tips for how to do that. I did want to say, before we get too much further in, when I'm doing the webinar or doing these virtual meetings, I tend to slip into straight on lecture mode, and I don't like to do that. So I'm begging you to ask questions if you have questions.
And everybody,
just shut me up for no other reason.
if you have questions and don't feel comfortable asking them, or you're someplace that's noisy or whatever, you can pop them in the chat, and I'll be monitoring the chat and get them to Heather too. So
yeah. So to start, maybe you've heard the podcast. If you haven't, typically in both the podcast and with lots of trainings that I do, we start with a quote that sort of sets the foundation for the conversation, and then we unpack it. So I do have a quote that I want to start with, and this is the same one we used on that Quit Tattling on Children episode. I don't have it on a slide, and I don't want you to worry about having to write it down, because I'm going to basically tear it apart once I read it to you. So this is from an April-May issue of a magazine called Teaching Young Children, which is published here in the States by the National Association for the Education of Young Children, in an issue that was focusing on challenging behaviors. And so in this article, they said, partner with families to let children know you're all working together to help them succeed. Tell parents about the behaviors you're seeing in the classroom and what strategies you're using so they can try those strategies at home. And ask parents what behaviors they see at home and collaborate and be consistent. That's very typical. That's in every textbook. That's probably in most workshops, magazine articles that you're going to read about communication with families. And I, as I read it and read it and read it, I finally realized why I was uncomfortable with this way of thinking. So I kind of want to just jump in to outlining that. And of course, please, if you have an example, love to hear those. Or if you have a question, please let us know. But the first problem that I had with this was the idea of partnering with families. Not opposed to partnership with families. I don't think this is how we achieve it. I mentioned a minute ago with Jeff that there's a power imbalance that I think makes it impossible to partner with parents about behavior issues. And I'm going to always imagine quotes around behavior issues when I say that. But you are automatically in a position of power, and parents are automatically in sort of a vulnerable position. They are trusting you with someone who means the world to them. They have essentially no control over what happens when they're away from their child and their child is with us. And really they want to know that we like their child. They want to know that we know what we're doing with their children. And if most of our communication, and sometimes the only time we can really communicate with families is to tattle, to give them that list of the things that their children did while they were with you that day, they're not going to get that message from you. They're not going to get that, oh, I really like your child and I want to be sort of equal in this relationship as we share the care.
In my experience, those conversations kind of become so heavy on the parent after a long day away. They feel like they've got to, I mean, if it's something quote unquote bad, they have to extend the punishment at home, or they've got to stand there and scold the child in front of you because they think that's what you want them to do.
Yeah.
And it's just so much. And it does have a profound impact long term on the relationship you have with that parent.
And with the child. And that goes into the next piece of the quote. You know, that they say that we're doing this to let the children know that their parents and us are on the same team working together to help the child succeed. And I'm not sure that that's the message children get if they hear us. And let's face it, they're going to hear a lot of those conversations because they're at pickup or drop off times, right? When they're zipping up their coat or getting things out of their backpack or out of their cubbies. They're not going to get that impression that, oh, this whole team is working for me. They're going to hear, the most important person in my life is hearing all the bad things that I did today. And this person I spend my days with doesn't sound like she really likes to spend her days with me. And I think that is not a message of working together to help the child succeed at the very base of it. They're more likely to feel ganged up on
Yeah.
and sort of small and dehumanized. I mean, I talk a lot about things we do that are sort of dehumanizing for children, and I don't mean it necessarily in a way that I think you're intentionally trying to objectify a child, but there are just things that are part of our daily habits as children are in groups together with us that tend to take away their individuality and their humanity, and being talked about over their heads is one of those things.
I mean, literally over their heads.
Literally over their heads, yeah. So it's a tricky, it's this partnering with families to let children know that we're all on their side is really an oversimplification of a lot of sort of complicated ideas and things that we need to unpack. It does also, and maybe you've heard this when we're talking about children, we talk a lot about, for at least circles that I'm talking in, that for every one negative interaction we have to have with a child, or an interaction that's perceived to be negative by that child, we have to have like 20 positive interactions to sort of balance that out. And I would suggest it's the same for families. If we're going to have one conversation that seems negative, we have to have had 20 at least conversations that really send the message that we know what we're doing and that we like their child and that we want to be truly partners.
So how do we do that?
Well, hold on, Jeff.
Okay, I'm just so excited.
I have something else I want to say about partnership. This sort of just fleshed out for me this morning. Oh, did I lose it already? Partnerships. What was I going to say? Oh, just that we're really good in our field about euphemisms. So we've moved from parent involvement to family engagement, and now partnership gets thrown in there, but we don't change our practice. We change the words we use to make it fit better with maybe new recommendations or new information, but we don't really change our practice. So we moved away from parent involvement because that seemed bossy and like we're telling them what to do and they're going to jump when we say jump. We moved to family engagement, but the practices are still very, very much not in balance as far as the power dynamic goes. So I would suggest that the most important piece of any of this is relationship, but the word relationship has become a buzzword too. So I think we really need to stop and think about what that means. It's more than just having a little banter in the morning or at pickup time. It's more than being Facebook friends outside of the program. It's really intentional acts that we are saying, you are important in this relationship. I'm gonna, do my part. You're gonna do your part, and we're gonna really focus on what this child needs from us. So things like, honestly, my kids are 25 and 27, and still the easiest way to get on my good side is to say something that makes me think you like them, or laugh at one of my stories about them. And I think that's the number one key to this relationship that I'm talking about, the kind of goal that we want to have, to truly be able to have conversations that maybe can help children if they're struggling. So as many stories as we can tell parents about something that was funny, something we noticed that really shows that we noticed their child as an individual. We're just listening to their stories and laughing at their stories. I think that's key to any kind of productive working relationship when we're sharing the care of a young child.
And it's never been easier to do that with the technology that we have. Back in my family childcare days, which was pretty much pre-Facebook and everything, we did some emailing with parents, but there were times that, and I mean, it was my wife Tasha and I running the program, but there were times I'd make phone calls during the day to parents to tell them a neat thing that happened.
Yeah.
So that they get used to having those little bits of information, because not only does it show them this positive thing that's happening in their child's day, I mean, their kids are on their minds at work, and having that little check-in. Back in the Stone Age, we had to actually dial telephones, was actually, I mean, you could hear in their voice the pleasure that they got out of those things.
Yeah. And that's like when I mentioned that I talked to some of my friends who are parents who I know have been on the receiving end of constant bad reports at the end of a morning or end of a day. That was the biggest thing, is they felt like over time they couldn't even talk positively about their child to the teacher because there wasn't that connection, and it was clear this teacher didn't really want. Yeah, I mean, one little boy was 3 years old, and they wanted to expel him from preschool because he wouldn't sit still in group times. And every day that was the conversation mom had to have. And so of course the message she got was, you don't understand my child and you don't really like my child. So that's one risk of having this idea that we just have, they have to know, or we have to share. We don't have to share everything. And even parents who say, I want to know, probably don't really. They'd probably rather hear the stories about what you like, what you thought was great with their kid that day. I tell the grad students that I work with now that because the answer always is too, or often is, well, the parents come in and they ask, was he good? Did he have a good day? Because that's what they think they need to ask, right? Or we haven't shown them any other options.
Yeah.
So even when a parent comes in and said, well, was he good? How was his day? I feel like what they're really asking me is, did you notice him? Do you like him? And so I shift and I make sure that I have something. And so if a parent comes in and says, was he good? I will go into, we had such a great interaction at the stand table today, and just completely focus on the positive, the good things. In most situations, again, I said, well, at the end, we'll talk about some of those specific times when we probably really do have to have a conversation.
Yeah. Well, Heather, since Dan Hodgins isn't here, I think it might be good to mention his mantra over the last couple of years has been, we need to stop making moral judgments about developmental situations.
Right.
I don't think I said that quite right, but I got it pretty close.
It's on my list. We have to stop making moral issues out of developmental issues.
We've started, but it's just banter.
Yeah, one of my favorite things Dan has ever said, and that's saying something, because he said so many things that I love. But so that's the other piece of this, is a lot of times the reports that families get sort of show that we don't understand development. So we need to be very careful about that too. You know, a 3-year-old who won't sit still is not a bad.
Is a 3-year-old.
He's a 3-year-old boy whose body is sending him the messages that you need to get up and move. And so then we're constantly sending him the message that your body's ideas are bad and you should feel ashamed about that. And then asking mom to do something at home that was going to get him to cooperate in group times, which is the next piece of the quote that I wanted to tear apart, unless somebody has questions or comments or examples about what we've already been talking about.
Somebody in the chat asked, who was the moral issues quote from? His name is Dan Hodgins. I will put a link to him in the chat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He has 2 books. One is called Get Over It, and one is called Boys, Changing the Environment, Not the Child, that are highly recommended. You can only get them as ebooks from his website right now, but I think they can be life-changing for people who are struggling with this idea of behavior. But so the other part of the quote is, we're supposed to tell parents about the behaviors we see in the classroom. And I don't think, I think most often when we feel that that's what we need to do, we're asking them to do something at home about it. When we talk about being consistent and collaborating, that's essentially what we're saying, right? We think you need to know this happened and I need your help so that it doesn't happen again. And so there are some human issues, some developmental issues involved there too, because for one thing, we all respond differently to different environments. So if I'm sitting at home with just my husband, I'm going to be acting in very different ways than if I'm out with my friends having dinner, or even at work playing with kids. So the idea that things happen in our classroom that can be addressed at home might be true sometimes, but most of the time it's not. We know that at 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, children they do not learn by hearing, right? They don't have that fully developed ability to think hypothetically and abstractly. So almost 7, really. So if we're saying, I want you to go home and talk to your child about something that might happen again tomorrow, we're not understanding how children learn, and we're setting them up to fail again, and we're setting parents up for frustration and discouragement. So that's the other reason that I tend to say we don't need to have all those conversations, just because it's not realistic. So the parent who says, oh, he never bites at home, probably is telling the truth. But I've been part of so many break room conversations where we're grumbling about this parent being in denial because her child is obviously a biter, but she won't admit it. Probably isn't biting at home because he's probably not sharing his space with 10 other children that he didn't choose to spend his space with, and an environment that tends to be sort of sensory, more stimulating. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. Than being safe at home with mom and dad and maybe one or two siblings. So that expectation that is some sort of partnership is also not in line with what we know about how children learn and develop.
Okay, so let me see if I get this straight, Heather. We want to reduce the number of tattling, like just general bad behavior report conversations, and replace them with more conversations focusing on the funny and humorous and good stuff that's going on in the program.
Yeah, I think first, relationship building efforts, being very intentional, and then just being very intentional about changing that conversation, if that makes sense. The other, I kind of touched on this, but I feel like there's sort of a release for us when we do tell on the children at the end of the day. And part of it's just venting. Venting feels good and can be really a relief for us. So if maybe that's something you have to do, but do you have to do it with a parent would be the first question there. But also it's sort of a unconscious release of responsibility. So we've got this problem in the classroom. I told mom about it. It's in her court now. And I think really honestly, a lot of our teacher prep courses teach us to think that way. And then we get upset because the parents aren't doing their part, and that's why the behavior continues. That's challenging us. So, and honestly, we're sort of unconsciously sending that message that we don't know how to do the job you're trusting us to do. So if you do, have to, you feel like there's something you really do want to share with a family, I would recommend never sharing just the incident, just the behavior that challenged you, but also sharing what we've done, what we're working on, what we're trying here with him. And if some of that stuff works for the family at home and they're seeing some of those same behaviors, then that's wonderful. We're helping with parents learning, we're advocating for our profession and our expertise, and we're probably being more helpful to the child. But if we just leave it as, he bit 3 kids today, and don't go any further with it, don't talk about what we're already doing, then I think that's counterproductive.
So it's about making those conversations solution oriented.
Yeah. I have to pause for a minute because surely there's a question.
Well, I guess my question is, how do you do that when you were one of the people that got bit during the day and this kid is driving you crazy and you're working an extra 3 hours because a coworker called in sick, and there's 4 other parents you have to talk to in the next 20 minutes?
Yeah. Well, I would not have the conversation on that day. I would wait until I had calmed down a little bit, or I would just be honest and say, I need to talk to you about some things that happened today. Can I call you? Could you make some time? Could you come in a little earlier tomorrow so we can have that conversation? And try to.
As a parent, that would scare the crap out of me.
Well, sure, but what is that? Is that worse than unloading while you're angry?
Yeah, I mean, I guess. Touché.
Yeah. And, I know that's a reality, especially when you're the one getting hurt and getting bitten. But that's where not making developmental issues into moral issues can really be a good mantra.
Yeah.
Too. The other conversation that I've had a lot with people working with young children about staff getting hit or staff getting bitten is the behavior is the same. The target doesn't make it better or worse. Like, the behavior is still biting. So let's figure out and talk about biting and not take it personally just because they did it to an adult. That's not more disrespectful. It's not more sociopathic. It's just the reality is you were the one that was the target of that behavior. But the behavior is still biting. And so we're still going to look for the things that will help. Why did he bite? Why did he feel that way? What can we do? And that's what we talk to the parent about. Now I'm waiting for arguments.
Does anybody else have a question? Because I've got something I want to throw in there. If everybody good? So Heather, I was just thinking about this. Tasha's been gone for a couple hours today. She's going to show up about half an hour after we wrap up, and she's going to ask how things are going. And the report I'm going to give her isn't going to be about the two big lazy dogs we have in the house doing appropriate dog stuff. I mean, they ran around when we went to the dog park, and they napped and they ate. But those are just pretty much the everyday developmentally appropriate, species appropriate things for the dogs to be doing. And so often what we do with the kids, it ends up being the stuff we report on is just the stuff that is 100% developmentally appropriate, and probably isn't worthy of the limited time we have with those parents. And
right.
I know you kind of touched on that, but it just really struck home with me that back in my days doing direct care for 26 plus years, we spent a lot of time having those conversations that really weren't pertinent to anything because we felt like we had to have those conversations.
Right. I think it's one of those things that's sort of part of childcare culture that we don't question unless something pops up to force us to question it. Of course, we should tell parents, of course, this is partnership. When in reality, what we should be doing is pausing and sitting on it a little bit and really thinking through if that conversation needs to happen, because could be, I'm thinking, I use biting a lot as an example because it's an easy example. If we know that children this age bite, and we have some information about the causes, then it shouldn't be that big of a deal. It should just be part of our work with young children, just like helping them, use the bathroom, or helping them figure out how to pour a glass of milk. We know that developmentally they're going to spill some milk, but we don't make reports every time they spill milk trying to pour it from the pitcher to the glass. Because we just somehow see behavior differently. We don't always see it as another area of development and learning. We see it as morality, and we see our role as the corrector instead of, oh, this is just another area of development.
Yeah.
And that I need to understand.
If you're listening to this and you're thinking, oh no, I'm doing that, don't. We've totally done this, and this isn't an attack on you. This is a chance to pause and think about, should I be doing this? Because I mean, I think Heather and I had those aha moments at some point, and I guess one of the reasons I was really interested in offering this session was I hope we can have people have those aha moments earlier in their careers than I had them.
Yeah, definitely. And I always feel like we have to offer that help because I get into preacher mode, and I don't want it to come across as judgment or criticism or, oh, you're ruining that child, but something to consider, a different way of thinking about it.
Can I add a parent perspective as well?
Of course, Nicole.
So as a parent, I can remember, an educator and a parent. So in my educator days, especially early on, and as a new educator and just trying to kind of fit with what everyone was doing, that was what we did. We reported to the parents in the afternoon. and we'd try and use a sandwich effect. We'd do a positive thing. This is something really good.
Yeah.
Oh, but then they were really crap. You know, this happened. It was not good.
Yeah.
But then this was good too. But it'd generally be kind of informational and whatever. And then obviously as you kind of evolve in your practice, you just sort of shift some of those things. And so I got rid of a lot of that and would mainly focus on those, you know, kind of nice, humorous little moments and whatever. And it wasn't until I became a parent that I realized just how much better that approach was for me as a parent, because I would arrive, and it would depend on the educator, but I would arrive to pick up, and particularly my youngest, because she's quite fiery. She's an interesting little character. So I'd arrive to pick her up, and we would have, depending on who spoke to me, it might be this happened and this happened and she was pushing and this happened, and I'd kind of leave there going, you know, I'd feel and then it'd change my afternoon with her. There'd be a dynamic already, because I'm already thinking, oh man, you know, you've had such a difficult day. And so there'd be this really weird dynamic. And then other educators would just go, oh, it was awesome. You know, you should have seen her climbing, and she was so, you know, up high and blah, 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 whatever. And I would leave feeling so much better. She may have still been doing those other things, but me knowing about it didn't actually change it. And I couldn't do anything about it. And that's, I think, sometimes what we need to think about as educators is, what is my purpose in telling the parent this information? If I've already dealt with it and I'm dealing with it in this context and it's just part of my role, it's kind of like the whole wait till your father comes home thing, you know, like mums used to say. I can remember my mum saying it when I was little, you know, oh, wait till your father gets home and I'll tell it. And I think, what's it matter? And by the time he got home, the whole thing was over, and yet we then rehash it again. And so I think it's that same thing, you know, we're doing that to children in our care environments by saying, well, we might not outwardly say, wait till your mum gets here and I'm going to tell her all about it. But we sort of send that message that I'm going to hold on to this. It's like, you've made a mistake, you've hit someone or you've bitten or whatever, but we're going to deal with it, but then I'm going to hold on to it, and then I'm going to kind of throw it back again a couple of hours later. So I just think I possibly didn't realize how much that impacts the parent-child relationship as well until I became a parent myself.
Yeah.
That's the moral of that story.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for sharing that. One of the other reasons that I feel like we need to really review our practices in this area is not necessarily research-based, but two things. One, I think that reunion at the end of the day between a child who's been missing their parent and the parent is one of the most beautiful reasons to be in the job, like to be part of those moments.
Sure.
And to kill that with a bad report or an incident note or something hurts my heart to see that happening. But also, home and family should be haven for that children. That should be their safety, their security. And they spend their days in large groups with, people who aren't their family, no matter how great we are, in environments that tend to be sort of institutional.
Heather, I've got a question for you in the chat.
Oh, okay, but let me finish this.
Yeah, sorry.
But then we send all this baggage home, and when they should just be able to go home and have a happy time at home with their parents. And so that's another part of the reason that I try not to have those. Okay, what's the question?
If and when the behavior escalates, how do you then talk to the family about it if you haven't addressed the situation earlier? We often have families asking, but why didn't you tell us about that before it got to this point?
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons, I said I'd get around to some reasons when we should have the conversations. If you see that it's a specific kind of behavior and that it's happening often, then I would start to just say, here's what we saw today. Here's what I'm doing to help. Do you have questions? Do you have suggestions? Although the do you have suggestions question is loaded, because what if they say spank him? What are we going to do? Or bite him back, or put Tabasco sauce on their tongue. Those are my favorites. So yeah, if you do see that it's leading to, or that probably there's going to have to be a conversation, then we want to make sure that we have done some throughout the day. So that's another reason that we need to be really intentional about the positives and the relationship building and the clear message that we like your child, so that when you do have to have, so maybe the first bite, I wouldn't, But if there's a little bit of biting every day, or if other children's parents are aware of it because their children were the victim of that behavior, then you want to make sure that they hear that. The important things are making sure that you talk about what you're already doing if you have to make those reports, and making sure that you're as transparent as possible. But I wouldn't do it right away. I wouldn't do it every time. You can kind of tell when it's going in that direction with a child, I think.
Yeah, well, I think the way you bring those things up, I mean, you can say, hey, she bit somebody today, in a way that floats by in the conversation and it's just informational, or you can say it in a way that it's a 50-pound weight that lands on their head. And so just the tone of voice and the way you bring it up in the conversation has an impact. And so I think when those things are, when there are things that you think parents need to be aware of, because there may be a pattern forming that you're going to have to deal with later on, you can bring them up in friendly, non-confrontational, this is a big thing we got to deal with right now ways.
Yeah. And I think that's why talking about what we're doing in response sort of sends that message that, this happened, but it's okay. We're going to get through it, is less maybe scary. But there's always going to be that protective urge, right? That the parent's job is to protect.
Yeah.
So so we could say it in a wonderful way, but the amygdala is still gonna, hijack everything and keep them from maybe hearing what you want them to hear. So making sure that if you have to have a bigger conversation, it's not when 4 other parents are in the room, also getting things out of their cubbies and getting the code. So thinking about timing, thinking about what else will be happening at the time that you want to try and have that conversation. Should it be a different meeting? We can acknowledge, I know it's scary to hear this, but I'd like to talk to you and I need a little bit more time than pickup time. So could you come in earlier? Could we talk on the phone later? And just acknowledging that, that's a scary thing.
Yeah, I think another way to address those kind of things is that's the message, the email or whatever later on in the day. Hey, this was a thing. It's not a big deal. This happened, just so there's that awareness there. But also when you do it in print like that, you have a paper trail if you ever need that, which in some situations you may, if something gets, if it ends up being a real situation and you want to document when it started and how it's progressed, having that paper trail is probably a good idea as well.
Plus, it gives you a chance to be a lot more thoughtful and have your own emotions sort of under control if you can put it into an email and think about it and reread it and think about it. But there's some proactive things too, like when I was a center director and children would start in the toddler room or move into a toddler room from the infant room, we always had like a little packet, and if parents wanted to, they could come in and talk to the teachers of that group. And of course, that would be different for family child care. But so that we'd say things like, it's not uncommon to see biting in a toddler room. We had a whole, sort of managing their expectations from the beginning handout that they would get that was short and to the point, that just said, it's typical developmentally for toddlers to do this. We expect it. Here's some of the things we do. So then if you have to come back around and say, we had some biting today, it's not as big of it won't feel as judgmental, I think. Because the other thing parents want to know is, do you think I'm a good parent? And what better way to measure that than by how good my child is? So if we can sort of set those expectations from the beginning and say, here are some typical behaviors for this age group. Here are the ways that we try to prevent it. Here are the ways that we respond when it happens. And they have that before anyone's child is personally involved in any of it. Then that helps too, to have a starting point for those conversations. I just feel like there should be must be questions, so I'm trying to practice the pause, but I'll just keep rambling on.
Here, you paused long enough. Here's the question. What do you think of behavior charts in rooms? Oh my gosh.
I don't like I don't think they're very effective. I think they work really well for children who are going to behave anyway, for the children who don't have those things that they're struggling about. I think it becomes, even though the intention is to acknowledge the positives, it becomes a tool for pointing out the negative too easily. Like without us, it's not our intentional thought to do it that way, but that's how it ends up being used. But also I just know that's not how children learn. And if we think about behavior, that's most of the time, those are mistakes that they're making in their social or their emotional development, or, just things that are typical for that level of development that they're at. So if a child has, trouble trying to put a puzzle together and you can't get the piece to fit, we don't set up a behavior chart that gives them a star every time they get a piece to fit and takes away something every time they can't get the piece to fit, because we understand it's something they're learning. So we model and we show it and we adjust. Maybe the puzzles are too hard and we bring in a different kind of puzzle. We model, we talk out loud while we are working on that puzzle piece, and that's teaching in our mind. When a child hits somebody, we tend to think we can just offer this blanket response of moving their clip to yellow or whatever. That doesn't help them learn to do better. It just shows them that they were wrong to do what they did. So I don't think it's a very effective technique to really help children learn what they need to learn to do it better the next time.
And it truly sucks a lot of time out of the day as well.
Yeah.
There's another question here if you're ready for it, Heather.
Oh, of course.
If we have children who desperately need help and intervention, and the parents aren't acknowledging it, and many conversations have been had with the parents, but they aren't proactively listening to us or acting on our advice, how could we approach the situation in a positive way?
Well, the short answer, I think, would be to just keep doing what you're doing to help the child when they are with you, and keep working on that relationship with the family. And because it's hard to hear that, and they will hear it as something's wrong with your child, and that's really hard for them. Anytime we, even though, so I work in a speech language department at Purdue University. So a lot of that is either making recommendations for other services, or sort of being liaison between a family and those other services. So I see all the time how hard that is for families to hear. So, but that is my other reason. I said I'd talk about other reasons that we should have those conversations. If you think that a child would benefit from some kind of additional service, then we do need to have those conversations, and they need to happen kind of over time, and not just be a boom, we think something's wrong with your kid. But this is an easy answer. The only person we can change is ourselves. So we can communicate with the family, we can show, documentation, we can talk about what the service would be that might be able to help their child. But if they're not ready for it, they're not ready for it. And so then we have to decide, do I want to keep working with this child? And I hope that would be the decision.
Yeah, and then because of confidentiality things, it's just about impossible to reach out to anybody else besides the parent.
Right. Like, so I'm in Indiana in the States, and the rule is that the parent has to be the one that contacts the early intervention services. But, we child care providers used to be able to make that referral, but now parents have to do it. So, so we can, like I said, continue to try and help. If we know people providing those kinds of services, whether it's behavioral or lots of times speech and language delays do lead to some of the behaviors that are challenging for us. Then we can talk to professionals who do those kinds of services and talk about how we can include it in our classroom or home without breaking confidentiality. And we can try to build support in that way. And then, we talk to families. We say, here are things we've added to what we're doing with your child. If you want more of that, here's a number. But there's not a whole lot. You can't change a parent's mind.
It's gotten even worse in the chat, Heather. We've got some situations where the parents even acknowledge there's something going on and still aren't doing anything about it.
Yeah.
Well,
that's a good question.
Yeah.
And the answer would depend on what's the thing that's going on and what the parent really is saying.
Yeah.
That could be 100 different.
My experience with this is the better my and my staff's relationship with the parents in those situations, the more likely there's going to be some movement on their end.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's not always a decisive marker about what's going to happen, but I think when there is tension and frustration with those families, for whatever reason, there was less likely to be any proactive activity on their end. And if we had a solid relationship, they trusted me enough to know that if I was bringing it up as a thing, it was a real thing. I think the other reason we need to pull back from all the daily reporting of the tiny little things is that when you're hearing that stuff every day,
Yeah.
you don't pay attention to the big things when they're brought up.
Right. Yeah. Well, and in talking about relationship in that specific question of, taking concerns to parents and not feeling like they're doing anything, if we have that relationship, we also have a better understanding of where that parent is coming from when they are resisting or saying flat out, no, we're not going to do that. It could be financial. They don't know how they would afford other services. It could be that they can't get time off of work to take their children to different, therapists or programs. Could be, a cultural stigma about, some kinds of disabilities and delays have that kind of cultural stigma. So there could be lots and lots of reasons that that's happening. I think the easiest, I guess, place to end that answer is to say, always give them the benefit of the doubt and assume. Don't go right into, they just don't care about their kid.
Yeah,
'Cause
and give them as much support, as much information, as many opportunities to be successful in doing the hard thing, the scary thing of seeking out services for the child or whatever as possible. And that's often going to mean going above and beyond what your job description may describe.
Yeah. There is another episode of the podcast that I did actually in March with two of the speech language pathologists that I work with at Purdue, where we talked about some of those kinds of things, talking with parents and getting through some of that resistance.
So what
Bottom
else?
line, if they think we like their children, they're going to be more likely to hear us when we do need to have those important
So what if we don't?
If we don't have those relationships?
No, if we don't like their children. Because no, I'm not trying to be a jerk,
No,
but
absolutely.
there are generally sometimes where you don't click with a child.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to hide that. And I would like to think everybody in the profession loved all the kids they work with the same, but some kids are challenging. And so how do you convey that when you might not really be feeling it?
Mm-hmm. Well, I do think there's an element of faking it that we have to sort of practice. I think if there is a child that we're really having trouble connecting with, then we need to figure out how to spend a little bit of time with that child. So I know that's setting to setting, that's really difficult to do. If you're in a family childcare home.
And spend a little bit of time with our own feelings.
That too. Because it could very well be that the thing that drives us crazy is to be expected developmentally for that age, and it's just a little bit inconvenient for us, or we don't understand it. So maybe there's some learning that we need to do about what the specific thing is about that child.
Yeah, I'm going to bring up.
You can still tell some kind of a story. You still notice that child having a blast on the slide outside.
Yeah.
Still tell that story at the end of the day.
We've got to be the adult in those situations and find those bright spots.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to bring her up again. I brought her up last week when we were talking to Mike Huber. Tamar Jacobs Tamar Jacobson talks about this. There's a lot of times in those situations where we have a child that really kind of rubs us the wrong way. It's because we're carrying around personal baggage that somehow has a connection there. So we do have Tamar upcoming in a session. I think it's going to be in early August. Is that what we figured out, Nicole? So that'll be up soon, and a kind of an opportunity to kind of dig deeper into that side of things.
Mm-hmm.
So what else do we need to know, Heather?
Well, I was trying to think of what else I wanted to talk about when we got to the part of the conversation about when we do feel like we have to talk to a parent about something that's going on. I think we just need to be in those situations very clear that we're not saying go home and punish him for what happened here today. We're telling you because we think you want to know. We're telling you because we want to talk to you about what we do and hear what your thoughts are. So we have to, and we can certainly say things like, we want to make sure that he's as well rested as he can be, or that she has everything she needs to be successful with when she's with us, without saying, well, how's he sleeping at home? Do you have a bedtime? Are you noticing any weird behaviors at home? Because that automatically will put them on the defensive. So I wanted to make sure that I mentioned that we can talk in general, not even specific to that behavior. We can talk in general about the Maslow stuff and the layers that they have some control over before they come to us, when they really don't have the control over what's happening with us. And we can do that in a non-threatening way.
Yeah.
Just sharing.
I noticed over the years that sometimes the behaviors that manifested themselves in kids were directly connected to things that were going on in the family away from the program. I mean, that's no big discovery. We all know that happens. Right. And so in those conversations, instead of talking about the child's behavior, sometimes I drifted towards asking, how was your day?
Yeah.
And building a relationship to the extent that parents felt comfortable maybe just venting to me, but also opening up a little bit, because that one kind of acted as a pressure valve for them that put them in a different frame of mind when they got into the car and drove away from the program and had the rest of the evening with their child, but also gave me a little bit deeper insight into what was going on.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a thought and it's gone. It was going to be really great, though.
I'm sure it was profound.
It was really good and profound. It was something about talking with families. Oh, so I 100% agree that we can use information about home stuff to provide better care when they're with us. And they can use information about what's happening with us to provide a smooth transition home again at the end of the day. We just have to be really careful about how we're sharing that. So it could, we're not going to say, so is anything going on at home that we need to know about? Although that's what a lot of my students, that's how they frame it. But we can say, how are you? Or, how are you feeling? Are you, whatever, those kinds of questions to just open up the conversation without saying, we suspect that things are terrible at home. Would you tell us about it a little bit?
Yeah, you frame it that way, and it's probably not going to go anyplace positive. Yeah. Heather, there's another comment in the chat. Across the workplace, is it confusing for a parent if they are receiving different points of view from different staff members, or is that just part of having different types of thinking and different personalities within the service?
I definitely think it's common, and I definitely think it's to be expected. Like, I don't know how you would solve that unless you had like a primary person sort of approach where one person is responsible for having the end of day conversations with these 5 children, and these 5 children is my co-teacher having those. So, primary caregiving with infants and toddlers, but I think that could be carried through to, I think it's key person approach is what I've heard that called when it's with older children.
Part of that is if you've got staff that are kind of all on the same page philosophically, the opinions and messages parents are going to get, or there's going to be less variation, I guess, if
Yeah.
everybody's on the same page.
Yeah.
Philosophically, if you've got a staff that's not as cohesive,
Mhm.
those different messages could be confusing and awkward
Right.
and kind of fan
Right.
the flames sometimes, I guess.
And when most of these conversations are happening at pickup time, most of the centers I've worked with or been part of have sort of the floater at the end of the day, you know, the high school kid who comes in for the end of the day to cover that shift, or you know, I don't want to say lower skilled, but that's what I'm going to say, or the people with less experience are the end of the day people, because the real teachers want to be there during the morning, and then they leave the rest to the closers. So we're leaving those very delicate and nuanced conversations to the people who have the least experience having the conversations, or understanding or weren't there when the thing happened during the day, and are just going based on someone else's report to them. So thinking about how we're staffing, if you're in a center as opposed to a home, thinking about our staffing patterns too, and how that affects relationships with families and how we're reporting about behavior things. I think that's an overlooked aspect, just our staffing patterns.
Is there any tip sheets about behavior we may be able to download online for parents? Do you have any links?
I'm sure I do. I mean, 0 to 3 has great, but it's just what it sounds like. It's 0 to 3 years old, has great tip sheets about what to expect.
It's 0to3.com is a program here in the States.
Understood.org has a lot of good tip sheets for older preschool children and school age children. But also read Dan's books.
Yeah, Dan Hodgen's books. I put the link to his website in the notes there, in the chat. So if anybody wants those. And Nicole put down Raising Children is a good site there in Australia. Any other thoughts, comments, questions before we wrap this up? So I think the big takeaway is we build relationships, we focus on the positive stuff, we cut back on reporting, doing the tattling kind of thing. We kind of sandwich in the things that need to be talked about in the most positive way with solutions, instead of making it a negative, like you're trying to run the parent down and add more stress to their day and make them feel like they have to punish their child. And any, is that a good, that's not a good sum up, but Heather?
Well, it's a sum up. It's certainly a sum up. There was one other, I'm getting really good at this. I don't know what I was just going to say. Hold on. I'm good at forgetting is what I'm saying. Know your why, like know your reason. Before you have that conversation, really know why you are having it and what your goal is. If your goal is just to vent, if your goal is for punishment at home, then rethink that. But if your goal is to share something that you see as building, or your goal is to share how you're helping support a child in a specific situation, then I would say, go ahead and maybe have that conversation, but always know why you're having it, so it's not just a reflex or a habit.
Well, there we go. Heather, I appreciate your time. I've just popped the certificate / evaluation link in the chat if anybody wants that. And thank you to Inspired EC for making this all possible. Nicole does all the hard work.
Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you very much.
You make sure the registration happens. That's the
Well, we had a
hard
little
part.
bit of a technical glitch where the Zoom link didn't go out, and I discovered at 9 o'clock this morning when the phone was like ringing hot.
Oh no.
I'm like, but we're all sorted. We're good. We made it. We're here.
Oh, good.
And I've got the recording for anybody that missed it, so I'll get that to you ASAP. Everybody have a great day there in the Australia, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
Everybody.
you.
Ta-da!
Ta-da.
I don't really know how to end these things.
You never know how to end these things.
We all just wave and smile till someone hits end meeting. This is how I'm leaving real life meetings when I go back to work. I'm going to wave around the table.
We said that the other day. Yeah, we're like, isn't that funny that you wave at the end of a Zoom meeting, but I'm not going to wave at the end of our real meeting.
Right. We're all piling our books and grabbing our coffees and getting out.
Yeah.
Thank you again, Nicole.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.